Welcome to the Kelly Patrick Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode, I am joined by Professor Walter Block and also Jorge Besada. Walter E. Block is a Harold E. Wirth Endowed Chair and Professor of Economics, College of Business at Loyola University in New Orleans. Walter was a great friend of freedom giant Murray Rothbard and is the author of the libertarian classic Defending the Undefendable, many other books, and he is very relevant for our purposes. The Classical Liberal Case for Israel, which he co-authored with Alan G. Fuderman. Walter has published many articles at the Ludwig von Mises Institute, LouRockwell.com, and many other publications. Jorge Besada is a fellow free marketeer and author whose economics and history-related writings, although far less numerous than Professor Block's, and Jorge did write that, but yes, that would be accurate to be fair. Far less numerous than Professor Block's have also been published at the Ludwig von Mises Institute and other free market publications.
All right, so thanks, Kelly. Now, guys, this is going to sound a little surreal, but I am getting contacted by Ludwig von Mises. Somehow Mises knew that we were going to do this, and he wants to join us and give us a few words of encouragement or whatever. So let's listen to Mises here.
Neither as judges allotting praise and blame, nor as avengers seeking out the guilty should we face the past. We seek truth, not guilt. We want to know how things came about to understand them, not to issue condemnations.
Wow. That's wonderful and very relevant to what we're trying to do. So we're very thankful that Mises came to tell us this, but he has another message.
Liberalism is rationalistic. It maintains that it is possible to convince the immense majority that peaceful cooperation within the framework of society better serves their rightly understood interests than mutual battling and social disintegration. It has full confidence in man's reason. It may be that this optimism is unfounded and that the liberals have erred. But then there is no hope left for mankind's future.
Yeah, so we have to have faith, right? That we can overcome all of these problems, and if we do not have enough people who feel like we can discuss this and solve this, then there really is no hope left for mankind. So it's great to have Mises come, but oh my God, I am also being contacted by Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism. We are so lucky. Let's see what he has to tell us.
Hello, I am Theodor Herzl, the founder of political Zionism. I am deeply sorry. I had no idea my well-intentioned ideas were going to eventually polarize the world and lead to so much chaos. We should have dealt with antisemitism via reason and education, not vilification, separation, and all the good versus evil warmongering that has been associated with the movement I started.
Now, I made that up. I feel like if I could go back, and talk to Theodor Herzl, maybe we could come up with a different way, to solve our anti-Semitism problems. So this brings us to how we want to start here. I want to ask Walter, give us your 5 to 10 minute history lesson of how you see this whole complex issue and all the chaos that we have sort of like evolve. Take us from as early as you want to and give us about maybe 10 minutes or however. So take it away.
Well, before I get into the Israeli situation, I have to say that I'm one of the few people still alive who actually shook the hand of Mises. And I'm unique because all those other people washed their hands afterward. I never washed my hand. So it's a little dirty, but if you shake my hand, you channel Mises. Another claim to fame that I have is I once beat Hayek at chess. And my way of beating people at chess, I say, look over there. And then I grab the queen and then I win. Okay. With that introduction, adding to the...
And Walter, I have not washed my own hand since I last shook it with yours. So I too have a few atoms of Mises in me. And that's what makes me somewhat productive.
Okay. I'm glad to transfer some of Mises's genetic code to other people. Okay, let's start with Israel. The way I want to start is not so much with Israel, but with John Locke. Who's John Locke? John Locke is one of the fathers of libertarianism. And he is most famous for the homesteading principle. How do you get to own land? You start, we each own ourselves, and now I mix my labor with the land, and I eventually own it after I've homesteaded it enough. And the rightful owner of that land is me, because I was there first. Now, it might be that, as in the case of Israel, the Jews were there 3,000 years ago, so they're the owner of all the contested property. However, the Romans, and then the Ottomans, and then the British kicked them out. But I think if I can extrapolate from John Locke and from Murray Rothbard and property rights, just because you were kicked out of the property that you rightfully own doesn't mean you're not the rightful owner. You're not the extant owner, that's true, but you're the rightful owner. So what happened is the Jews were there 3,000 years ago. The Christians were there 2,300 years ago and change. And the Muslims came around 1,400 years ago. They were Johnny-come-latelys. So I say that the contested areas between the Arabs and the Jews are in the right because we were there first. I'm Jewish, so I can speak in behalf of some Jews at least this Jew. And I say that we're the proper owners. Now, it's true that many Arabs have lived there for hundreds of years, but the Jews were there thousands of years. And according to John Locke, who is the rightful owner? The guy who was there 3,000 years ago, or the guy who was there 300, 400, 500 years ago, because he took over land that the Jews were kicked out of. And I say that the Jews were there first. Okay, that's the first point on land issue, because a big claim of the anti-Semites, or the people who are opposed to Israel, which is not the same thing, is that the Jews are colonists. They're taking over. They're interlopers. They're trespassers. They're taking over Arab lands where Arabs had tilled the soil for 300 years, or whatever the number of years is. And I say that this is fallacious. The proper owner are the people who were there before. Now, it's true. I don't say it's true, but it's possible that there were some Canaanites who were there before the Jews, maybe 5,000 years ago. If so, let us hear from a Canaanite and let him say, well, I was there before the Jews. And if so, we are obligated legally and morally as libertarians to say, okay, Canaanite, you've made your point. You have shown some evidence, and we will deal with you in a fair way. There are no Canaanites that are popping up, so it's hard. This is only theoretical. An interesting occurrence is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, the Al-Aqsa Mosque sits on top of the second temple, the Jewish temple, and under that is the first temple. So who was there first? The people on top or the people below? Obviously, the people below. Now, different nations have different pastimes. The pastime in the United States, the sport is mainly football. In Canada, it's mainly hockey. In most of the world, it's soccer. Do you know what it is in Israel? Archaeology. The Jews are forever digging and looking and poking and seeing what's going on. So it's not just that the Jews were before the Arabs on that little bit of land, the Second Temple, but everywhere, all over the place. They dig and they find the first level. They find Arab beads or Arab coins or Arab cloth or stuff like that. And then they keep digging, and then underneath that they find Jewish stuff, Jewish coins, Jewish implements, Jewish evidence that the Jews were there first. So to my way of thinking, this argument that the Arabs are really the rightful owners and the Jews are interlopers is just wrong. Okay, the second issue about land is 1948. What happened in 1948? We're moving ahead in history a little bit. What happened in 1948 is that the Jewish state was declared, and I think 5 or 7, it's very unclear, armies invaded. But before they invaded, they sent out a message. And the message was, get out. And the message was not to the Jews. They didn't tell the Jews to get out. They were telling the Arabs to get out. Why do they want the Arabs out? Because they want to slaughter all the Jews. And it's a pain in the neck to have Arabs there, right there, because then the invading armies would have to distinguish between the Arabs and the Jews, and they'd have to protect the Arabs, but not the Jews. Be a pain in the neck for them. I'm putting words in their mouth, but this is the gist of what they said. They said, get out, go away, take a vacation, go visit somebody somewhere else, get away, and then in 2 weeks we'll mop up all the Jews, and you come back, and now we'll have a Juden-free zone, Jewish-free zone, no Jews allowed. Well, in the event, it didn't work out quite that way. The Haganah and the Palmach and the Stern group beat them, and now they all wanted to come back. They had the so-called right of return. And the Jews were saying, look, you just committed treason. You were cooperating with the enemy. You left so that they could slaughter us, and now you want to come back and you want us to welcome you? Get a life. Again, I'm putting words in the mouth of the Israeli government in 48 and 49 when they wanted to come back. But this was the gist of what they said. Now, it's interesting. At around the same time, 1948, by the way, there were just a fewer than 1 million Arabs who left. By the way, there were some Arabs who stayed. And those Arabs and their children are now 20% of the Jewish population, and they're treated very well. They are professors, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're judges, they're policemen, they're army officials, officers in the army. They even have political parties in the Knesset. So to say that it's sort of like the way South Africa treated the blacks under apartheid is just silly. The Arabs who remained were welcome. The Jews asked them to stay, but they left. About 1 million or 800,000 or 900,000 Arabs left. And then they were not allowed to come back, nor were they allowed to be integrated into any of the Arab countries. Instead, they were put in, I don't know what you'd call them, refugee camps, concentration camps, and they've been living there ever since 1948. Now, by some coincidence, around the same time that the
breaking up a bit.
Are we okay?
Yeah, I think we're okay now. We may have to repeat the last 5 to 10 seconds. If you could recap what you kind of said there, that would be great.
Okay. The last 5 or 10 seconds is that there were the number of Arabs who left and who were traitors and wanted to come back, and Israel didn't welcome back, was a little bit less than 1 million. The best estimate is something like 800,000, 900,000. By some coincidence, almost exactly the same number of Jews left Egypt and Syria and Lebanon and all those other countries that were invading. Why did they leave? They weren't traitors. They didn't do anything wrong. It's just that they were victimized by pogroms, and they fled for their safety. And the Israeli country, the Israeli state, welcomed them, integrated them, and they took part. So you see how much different the Jews treated the Jews in trouble compared to the Arabs treating the Arabs in trouble. The Jews were very nice. The Arabs were not so nice. Okay, so that's the second element of land disputes. They call this the Nakba, or the disgrace, or the horror, something like that. I forget the exact translation. I just remember Nakba. But the Nakba was well-deserved. Those people didn't deserve to come back because they were traitors. If they came back, they should be put in jail. They shouldn't be. And what they say is, well, look, I have a key to my house. They might say this in 1950 or 1951. I've only been away 2 or 3 years. I still have the key. Why can't I come home? Well, how dare you steal my house? Well, what should have happened, what might have happened if there were any rationality, is that all the Jews that left Egypt and Syria and Iraq and Iran and all those places, their property should have been given to the Arabs who were trying to get back into Israel, and then the Jews would take over all the Arab countries where the Arabs left. That would have been some sort of rough justice or poetic justice. It was never even thought about, let alone implemented. Okay, now the third point that I want to make is this point about genocide or war crimes or killing children and all those claims. The Jews are practically Nazis. They're killing everybody with no respect. The average army over history, for every military enemy that they kill, do you know how many soldiers, how many civilians they kill? 9. So for every soldier that a typical average army in history kills, they kill 9 civilians. Do you know what the Jewish record is for IDF? The Jewish record is for every military person they kill 1.5, not 9, 1.5 non-combatants. This shows that the IDF, the Israeli army, is very, very concerned about the safety of enemy civilians, much more so than any other military. When the Arabs put a rocket launcher in a hospital, do the Jews first bomb the hospital? No. What they do is they bomb the hospital with leaflets or warnings or something. And they say, look, you're shooting rockets out of here. We can't just sit there and twiddle our thumbs while you're shooting rockets at us. We're not a suicidal nation. We have to defend ourselves. And if you're going to shoot rockets from a hospital, we're going to flatten that hospital. And then everybody says, oh, my God, they flattened the hospital. That's horrible. The Jews are evil because they flattened a hospital or a mosque or a playground or a residential area. And they make great sway or great way over the fact that, 85% of all the buildings in Gaza are flattened. And they say, how could the Jews do that? Well, they're chasing Hamas, and Hamas is first in this house, we bomb this house, then they go here, we bomb that, then they go here, we bomb that. Well, that's how it would be. Look, if the Israelis wanted to commit genocide, they could have killed all 2 million of the Arabs in, 6 days has some sort of historical precedent, but they could have done it in 6 hours, maybe even 6 minutes. If they wanted to kill them, they could have just killed them all. Instead, the claim is that there's, 60,000 people have died, and of that, maybe 20,000 children. Well, first of all, these numbers, they come from Hamas, and one wonders, just how accurate they are. But let me give you a little illustration. I now have my 2 children, a rabbit and a wolf. Don't ask how I cross species. My wife and I, we had these 2 children, and I place them right here. And by the way, I'm Hamas, you're Israel. And here's my knife. It's a pen, so don't worry. And now I'm going to come get you. I'm going to kill you, you dirty Jew, you kike. I'm going to kill you. And you have a gun. You're Israel. You're more powerful than me. And what should you do? You only have 2 choices. One, you shoot me. And the only place you can shoot me and get me for sure is right here, and you'll kill my children. Or the other is, you just let me kill you. So what are you going to do? I'm rushing at you with blood in my eye. I'm going to kill you, you rotten Jew. And the only way you can stop me is by shooting me and my children, because I've got them strapped right here. Well, what do? You only have 2 choices. Well, if you don't shoot me, then you and your children die. And that's suicide. And I don't think it's appropriate to ask Israel to do that. The other is you shoot me. And now comes the question, well, who's responsible for the death of my children? Me or you? Or maybe a little of each. And some people say that you're responsible, Israel, because your bullets killed. Other people say, well, it's really both. I say, this is crazy. I put my children in danger. I am the one responsible for those deaths of those children. And it just seems to me so clear. And I can't see how anyone could disagree with that. And yet, that's what Hamas does. By the way, the Nazis never did that. The Nazis never hid behind women and children and dared the Allies to shoot them and shoot their children. The Japanese, the fascists in Italy, none of them ever did anything like that. This is we have to credit Hamas with an invention, using their own civilians as shields, and then getting the whole world to believe that it's the fault of Israel for shooting children. Of course they have to shoot children because the children are right here. Now I have to make a little complication. And the complication is, if you shoot me here, 99% you'll prevail. But if you shoot me in the head, you only got a 50% chance. On the other hand, if you shoot me in the head, then when I fall, the children will be saved. So, are you obligated? You're on the defense, I'm on the offense. Are you obligated to give yourself a 50% crapshoot for committing suicide? Or are you obligated to shoot me in the head? And I say, no, you're not obligated to shoot me in the head, even though it's a half chance that you'll get me. And now what I'm talking about is what happens is that these Hamas people, what they do is they go home at night. They don't realize there's a war. Look, the mafia, when the mafia was shooting each other, they said it was just business. And they would go to the mattresses. What does going to the mattresses mean? They would get out of their houses because it's improper. It's a disgrace to shoot women and children. So they would go to a little house and they'd get 25 mattresses, and that's where they'd sleep, and then they would fight each other. The Hamas fighters don't realize, what do they think, that there's a home-free base that they can go home and be safe? So yes, a lot of times the Israelis, when they see a Hamas fighter in a house and he's got his wife and his kid and his mother-in-law, they bomb the whole house and kill all of them. Are they justified? It sounds horrible. But whose fault is it? Whose fault is it that they went home? They shouldn't go home. They should go to their tunnels or go somewhere else and then spring out at the Jews and kill the Jews. Well, I'm not advocating that. But what I'm saying is that when the Jews, the IDF, bombs a house with a Hamas fighter and a few innocent people, they're justified in doing it because you are not obligated to shoot me in the head. You can shoot me here because here you only have a half chance or a small chance. Here you have a big chance. So when they're sleeping at home, they're more easily gotten than when they're out and about committing mayhem. Okay, so let me summarize. You asked for 10 or 15 minutes. I hope I didn't go too long. What I'm saying is that 3,000 years ago, the land titles are Jewish. In 1948, the land titles are still Jewish. And nowadays, after 2003, October 7th, the day that will live in infamy forever, the Jews are in the right. And the world opinion is in the wrong. I mean, the UN at one time had, accused Israel of more war crimes than twice as many war crimes than all the other countries in the world. So the UN is not really a fair judge. I mean, nor is world opinion a fair judge. And there are even Jews who renegade Jews, who self-hating Jews who say, well, we have to stop the war because we've got to get the hostages back. Look, if you get those hostages back and make a peace treaty, in 5 years, there'll be more hostages. And that's no way to run a railroad. Okay, that's my opening statement.
All right, thanks, Walter. Yeah, I mean, it's important that we understand how people see things, and we somehow, we come up with something. So let me bring up a couple of things. So, I mean, if one really makes the argument that, the Jews were there first and we use the Lockean principle, so then, I mean, so what would you say, for example, there are authors like Shlomo Sand, an Israeli-born author, where he has written books about the history of the Jews themselves. And according to him, I mean, a lot of what we think is like real history is still just a lot of very complex mythology. So one can introduce the doubt that says, okay, even if there were Jews living there, 3,000. No, I mean, he's making the point that how can we possibly make a claim to say that the Jews of Europe right now, who have been in Europe for 1,000 years, based on what could be all kinds of mythology, have a rightful claim to just say, wait a minute, all the land in this area, because of some old religious text, tells us that our ancestors were on some parts here, that somehow we have a legitimate claim, a Lockean claim, to own all this land. I mean, that's something, something that some people, can bring up.
Well, yeah, that is a good claim. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good claim, but it's an accurate assessment of some claims.
Right. It's something to consider, something for us to keep in mind as we're trying to make sense of things. Right.
We have a whole chapter in our book trying to demolish that argument.
Oh.
And the way that goes is they are the children of the people who are the rightful owners. Let's change the subject a little bit.
Great.
let's talk about reparations to black people for slavery in the United States, just for a minute, because I think it's a good analogy. What should have happened in 1865, when slavery was ended, was that the punishment for slave owning should have been you become a slave. And you guys, I'm willing to impose post facto law. Post facto law means that we declare something illegal even though it was legal. And the slave master might say, well, look, slavery was legal up until 1865. What are you getting on my case? And it's the same thing with the German Nuremberg trials. The Nuremberg trials, they were saying, okay, you're a Nazi, you're guilty. And the Nazi was saying, wait a minute, under proper German law in 1943, 1944, it was a virtue, a mitzvah to kill Jews and homosexuals and Romani and blacks and any non-Aryan. And the Nuremberg trial committee, I think, properly declared ex post facto law, saying, we don't care what the law was. It was an improper law. We're declaring it illegal ex post right now. Well, I think that's what we should have done with slavery. Now, look, if you're a slave, you can't own property. Your master owns your property. So the ex-slave master, who is now a slave, what happens to his property? What happens to his plantation? Well, say there were 10 slaves working on the plantation. They should each get 1/10 of the plantation. Now, there are three views on this. The right-wing view, with which I disagree, is that no black is owed anything by any white because slavery ended in 1865 and nobody's a slave now. The left says that all whites owe all blacks reparations for slavery because whites enslaved blacks. The problem with that is there were some black slave owners. And then there were also whites who came to the country in 1905 or 1995, had nothing to do with slavery. Why should they pay for slaves? So I reject that. And I also reject the right-wing view that nobody owes anything because right now, sitting in Harlem, there's some black guy. And his great-great-grandfather worked on a plantation in the middle of Louisiana. And he can prove it. He's got evidence, not old religious texts, but evidence. And he comes to the court and he says, hey, I'd like 1/10 of that plantation. It's true that the present owner of that plantation is the great-great-grandson of the white slave owner. And he's not a criminal. He's just holding stolen land, unbeknownst to him. And I think justice would mean that the black slave, the black great-grandson of the slave, would go to court and get 1/10 of the plantation in Louisiana. Namely, that's the way we should do it with, and we've lost it again.
I think I can hear you now.
We're back.
Okay.
Just for 1 second, we're back.
See, what you were saying is, well, there's a guy in Europe, but what the hell is he doing claiming stuff in Israel? Well, Europe is about as far from Israel as New York City is from Louisiana, give or take. Don't bother me about the miles. It's close enough for government work. So if it's justified to give this black guy from Harlem 1/10 of the plantation in Louisiana, it's equally justified to give to the European Jew somewhere in, I don't know where, in Greece. And he comes to Israel and he says, oh, I want some land, and I think he should be given some land. So the idea that just because they've been away for hundreds of years, well, the black guy has been away for 160 years, right? I mean, it's roughly 160 years since the end of slavery. So I think I'm making a good analogy. And if you agree with me that the black guy
Breaking up again.
should get 1/10 of the plantation, then you also have to agree with me. Am I speaking too loud or too fast? Or
I don't know. I think I have a good internet.
We'll do the best we can. And if we miss a few words, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So that's my answer to your question. Just because the Europeans are far away and have had nothing to do with the Israeli land for 500 years, Well, the same thing with the blacks, only it's 160 years instead of 500 years. No big deal. It's the principle that we're talking about.
All right, good. But again, like for example, I do not see like property in a purely Lockean sense. I am much more of a fuzzy Hayekian. You know, Hayek was all over the place when it comes to these things. And I think we have to look at the world, at the complexities of the reality and how the world sort of evolves. You know, the legal framework that we have is the result of a complex evolutionary process. And we just have to kind of go along and do the best we can. And I do think that even if we could prove 100% certainty that 3,000 years ago, you know, some remote ancestors of the Jews living, you know, at the beginning of Zionism, even if they were the owners of the land, I still think it would be a big mistake to suddenly say, oh, the current European Jews are suddenly the owners of all that. You know, I think it would still be an intellectual error.
Well,
You know, because
how do you feel about the black guy in Harlem getting 1/10 of the plantation in Louisiana? Are you consistent in saying we shouldn't give it to him?
uh, again, you know, these things are very complex. I don't think we can just use our reason to have a simple formula that deals with all these things. I mean, it's a lot closer to the future. I mean, to the present. I do think that we can go back and look at families, and I am definitely for some kind of restitution for blacks who worked in certain lands and so on. And I think I'm totally for that. But there's a big difference between that, just 150 years, and 3,000 years, when so much of the history is like Shlomo Sand's books explains. In one of Shlomo Sand's books, he talks about being in Israel and going to the Israeli historians and telling them, what actual proof do you have that this is the actual tomb, the tomb of King David? And they said, oh, we really don't. We just kind of like made it up. So again, how can we make these Lockean claims when so much history is open to so much, you know, you know, to so much variety? How can I, on some complicated historical claim that we have very little proof of, that there's so much mythology, how can we suddenly say that now you are the rightful owner to all these things? So again, you know, it's very complex, but we need to keep it in mind, and we just do the best we can and all these things. Now, something regarding like Zionism.
Well,
Yeah,
let me respond to that. I mean, at worst, we'll have to agree to disagree.
sure. Yeah.
No big deal. And I'm delighted that we can agree to disagree. Now, you'd think, what am I crazy? Complimenting you on agreeing and disagreeing with me? This should go without saying. Two scholars, two historians disagree, and then we continue. We argue, we dialogue. This is very different than the Mises Institute and the Ron Paul Institute and the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com and a few other libertarian groups that have excommunicated me for being a John Lockean. They just won't discuss it. Hans Hoppe, the leader of that pack, or one of the leaders of that pack, he made a great contribution, as far as I'm concerned, to libertarian theory with his argument from argument. And yet he won't argue with me. He won't debate me. I've asked him, I've challenged him to a debate. So what I want to do is compliment you for agreeing to discuss in a civilized manner with me issues that are very complicated, as you say. Now, let me try again to convert you to the one true faith, namely agreeing with me. You don't like the fact that the slavery was only 160 years ago, and the other stuff is 3,000 years ago, so I can do a little bit better. I can do 700 years. When the first Europeans came over to the North America, I think it was 1607, and now we're 700 years. We're still not up to 3,000, but I'm doing the best I can. There were Indians there when the white man first came, and those Indians, they weren't twiddling their thumbs. They were homesteading land, and the land was taken away from them. And I think justice requires that it be given back, not the whole country. See, a lot of people try to say, well, here's a reductive ad absurdum against me, namely that if I'm right about Locke and the Jews own the land vis-a-vis the Arabs, well, then we whites should all get out and the Indians should own the whole place. The problem with that is right now we have, 360 million people, give or take, in the United States. If you take a plane from Boston to Los Angeles, east of the Mississippi, you'll see a few lights at night here and there. West of the Mississippi, except for Denver and Las Vegas, there's nothing. The whole place is empty. I'm exaggerating, of course, but with 360 million people, the place is empty, virtually empty. How many Indians were there when the white man came? The best estimate is something like 3 or 4 million. Well, look, if 360 million can't fill up the continent, 4 million or 3 million can't. So, yes, we owe the Indians something and injustice, and if they can demonstrate that they were there first in some way or other, I think we're morally and should be legally obligated to acknowledge their claim. So I'm hoping now that I can convince you that the sticking point was 160 years versus 3,000. To me, that's no sticking point at all, because we're talking principle, not number of years. It's true, more things happen in 3,000 years than in 160 years, but now I've got 700 years. Between 1600 and 2300, I've got 700 years. It's true, it's not 3,000, and I wish I had a better example that I could run by you, but I think 700 is a pretty good faith effort on my part. So do you agree that we should acknowledge the Indian land claims such as they are? And if so, why not the Jews?
I would love for us to take that land and privatize it and give it to the Indians. I would love to do that, but
Great.
I do not see it in sort of like moral terms, that this is something that has to be done, in order for some libertarian moral, code, or what we think ethics is ethical, or and so on. Again, I am too much of a fuzzy Hayekian, so reason only gets us so far. It's really the competition of ideas, of legal systems. So I am not into seeing it in terms of what I think is morally right or wrong. I am more into I'm more of a Misesian utilitarian, right? Mises, as you know very well, Mises was not in favor of natural law and those things. So we just do the best we can, so, and I think we both agree that privatizing all that land and giving to the Indians would be awesome,
Well, I tried my best. I gave it my best shot. We'll still agree to disagree. No problem.
Yeah, we disagree. We just want to get closer to more prosperity.
I just have to make a comment about Hayek. You also flashed my book, Defending the Undefendable.
Of course, yeah.
And in his introduction to that book, he wrote something that just knocked me out. He said something like, I'm sort of like Mises. And I was like 32 years old when that book came out. And I thought he was drunk when he wrote that, but I'm very grateful to him. On the other hand, several articles of mine have criticized him, The Road to Serfdom, for giving too much away to the lefties.
Yeah, a bit too statist. Yeah.
And I felt guilty because here I am biting the hand that feeds me. But I tell my students who can criticize me without me jumping down their throats. Just as Hayek was very gracious, he was nice to me, even though I was critical of him. I try to apply the Hayekian influence that I got from Hayek to my own students. And when they disagree with me, I don't give them a bad mark or anything like that. I try to deal with them on a rational basis. So we have to agree to disagree on that issue.
I have a question, if that's all right. Professor Walter, I have been fortunate to interview ultra-Orthodox Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro a couple times. He's based in New York, and he would argue that Israel is heretical. Israel does not represent the Jewish people. Since the beginning of the state of Israel, it was many people presenting themselves as Jews who were oftentimes actually atheists, and the sole driver for anti-Semitism, the increase of anti-Semitism in 2025, according to Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, would be the actions of the state of Israel in the name of the Jews, that conflation of Judaism with Zionism. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know who was a bitter opponent of the creation of Israel in 1947 or 46? The ultra-Orthodox Jews. Why? Because they had the view that Israel would be completed once the Messiah came. But there's no Messiah. So it's a sacrilege to have the state of Israel. You read Chaim Potok, one of my favorite not composers, authors, novelists, and he depicts Danny's father as bitterly, nastily opposed to the state of Israel. And some of that still remains among the ultra-Orthodox. Happily, less so, because I favor Israel. Now, this thing about atheism, I'm an atheist. I read, who was it, David Hume when I was 15, and he converted me to atheism. But I was bar mitzvahed, and I have Jewish blood in me. And if I were to go over to Israel, they would accept me, even though I don't daven. I used to when I was bar mitzvahed, but I'm a Jewish atheist, and they would respect me. And if I did aliyah, namely go up to Israel, so it's not a matter of religion; it's a matter of genetics. The idea here, look, why did we respect that black kid in Harlem with his right to the 1/10 of the plantation? Because we have this assumption that fathers give their riches to their sons, the sons give it to the grandsons and the great grandsons. So if you reject that, well, then the European Jews have got no right whatsoever, because who the hell are they? But if you respect the idea that in ordinary circumstances, parents give to children, children give to grandchildren, grandchildren give to great grandchildren, and on up and on down, well, then I think the Jews have a very good case. Now, this idea that the creation of Israel is making it worse for Jews. That was the other point that Kelly made. I don't abide by that. My understanding of the history is we Jews keep getting kicked out of every country. They invent a new country, Jews go there, and they're fine for 5 years, and then they get kicked out. And then they have to go somewhere else. Thank God, I'm an atheist, I say thank God anyway, there is Israel. And if we Jews get kicked out of the U.S., it could happen. Look at what they're doing in Columbia, my old alma mater, and in Harvard. They have Jewish free zones on Columbia, and Jewish students in Harvard are not allowed to go here, not allowed to go there. And if they see a Jewish star or a yarmulke, they start beating them up. Well, things look good in Nazi Germany, or not Nazi Germany. Things look good in Germany in 1920. A lot of Jews went into Germany. Germany was very welcoming. And later on, they were a little less welcoming. Well, it could happen here. And if it happens here, thank God we have Israel. So these Jews who say, well, Israel is ruining it for Jews. Look, there's been anti-Semitism before 2023 and before 1948. There's been anti-Semitism I don't know, forever. I mean, we killed Christ, didn't we? That's the claim. We killed Christ. Christ was Jewish, by the way, but we killed him. And I think ever since then, there's been I'm not a good historian. Maybe there was anti-Semitism before that, but certainly there was anti-Semitism then. So this rabbi, with all due respect to his Talmudic learning, I think is out to lunch when he says that Israel is an anchor holding us down rather than a lifesaver. So I would respectfully disagree with that rabbi.
Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, I have a feeling he would respond and say that the current state of Israel is arguably the most dangerous place where Jews live today, for Jews to live. He would say the violence, the rate of being attacked, things like that are higher in Israel. So it's not this safe haven for the Jews.
So
well, I think the rabbi would have a good point. That right now, for the moment, until this war is done, it's a little dangerous for Jews. Who could disagree with that? I mean, it's an obvious point, but I don't think that it obviates my point. Look, this war will be over in a matter of weeks or months, and I hope that all the hostages will be returned, and I hope that Hamas will no longer be a force, and I hope that Iran will have a change in government. You know the first country that recognized Israel?
The United States.
Oh, the United States? Well, then Iran was second.
Okay.
So, there's hope. Look, just because your safe haven is under attack doesn't mean it's not a safe haven. So with all respect, and I think you're in tune with the rabbi, that's probably what he would say, but I would reject that as well.
Yeah, so Walter, I mean, I agree that anti-Semitism has been around like forever, but anti-Semitism is really just a set of intellectual errors, right? I mean, like we can't really blame Christians in the 1400s for believing that the Black Plague or the bad weather is due to Jews, right? I mean, because back in the day, we lived in a very different world, right? And I'm sure the Jews had their own horrible theories about non-Jews. We were equally human, and everybody's making various mistakes. But in reality, anti-Semitism is a set of fallacies. And in the discussion you and I had 3 years ago, I asked you, what are some of the reasons for this anti-Semitism? And in reality, it's just a few fallacies that are easily overcome through reason and logic. And I remember you going over the vital example of how the Jews were forbidden from certain professions. There was a classic example of the Islamic world and the Christian world outlawing money lending, causing the Jews to be inadvertently overly represented in finance and banking. There's also the fact that Jews, for various complex factors, were inadvertently overly represented in the Bolshevik Revolution, right? Just because they are inadvertently overly represented in some of the upper echelons of the Bolshevik Revolution, it does not obviously mean that they plotted the whole thing, for sinister control, as so many naive thinkers believe, like Hitler, obviously.
Well, I'm ashamed of those Jewish Marxists. I'm ashamed of the Jewish communists, and there are. Look, in the United States, the Jews are almost a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
They vote something like 70-30 or 75-25 for the Democratic Party. Donald Trump has done more for the Jews than any other president. I mean, he did the David Accords. He moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem for the offices,
Embassy.
the embassy.
Yeah.
He half his family is Jewish. They converted to Judaism.
Yep.
He's now giving Columbia and Harvard a good talking to about their anti-Semitism, and also about the fact that you can't find a libertarian or a conservative professor, even though these schools have got over 3,000 professors, and they can't pass the Sodom and Gomorrah test of 10 righteous people. You go to Harvard or Columbia, you don't find even 10 libertarian or conservative professors. And Donald Trump is saying, this is problematic. And also the anti-Semitism, the Near Eastern studies is totally
No.
misoriented.
I agree that there's still a lot of naive anti-Semitism. I mean, like the hard left, they love to paint the Israelis as just a bunch of white settler capitalists that are exploiting everyone, and they're clueless. They're not really looking at the history of anti-Semitism, the Second World War, and all these other factors. They just have this cartoonish way of looking at things. Also, we could call the extreme right. There are some people who feel like the Jews, did not convert to Christianity. They're the Synagogue of Satan, right? So there are a lot of anti-Jewish fallacies, right? But the point I want to make is that in order to overcome anti-Semitism, we want to understand the fallacies and overcome them through reason and logic and sympathy for the misguided, the same ways we overcame slavery, unequal rights for women, and so on, right? So one of the main reasons, actually the motivating factor for Zionism was to escape anti-Semitism as a cure for anti-Semitism, right? And Theodor Herzl, I'm sure you probably know this, Theodor Herzl, at some point, he seriously wanted the Pope to somehow convert all Jews to Christianity to help overcome the problem. I mean, talk about an absurdity, right? But
I don't agree with that, but
of course, yeah.
Certainly Herzl was the father or grandfather of Zionism. And
Right.
all Zionism is that there should be a country for Jews. Look, the Japanese have a country for Japanese. The Chinese have a country for Chinese. The Italians have a country for Italians. The Brazilians have one for Brazil. Why should only the Jews not have a country for Jews?
Oh, no. I mean, I understand and in many ways sympathize, with that thinking. But again, at the same time, Zionism as an ideology arose to help overcome anti-Semitism. But it never tried to overcome anti-Semitism the only way we can solve intellectual errors with reason and logic and sympathy. And we actually know that the mistakes behind anti-Semitism are very simple. You already discussed several of them, right? We already talked about it. The money lending, how they were overrepresented in all these things, and how people make mistakes. But Zionism didn't do that. Zionism just said, the non-Jews somehow they're just evil, and the best thing we can do is encourage a lot of Jews to leave the places where they have spent thousands of years, to go create themselves a state in an area where, I mean, we know that Zionism was not popular, right? Most people in that area were opposed to the Jews creating a Jewish state there and coercing everyone into a Jewish flag, a Jewish national anthem. The vast majority of people who were living in that area during the days of the Balfour Declaration, after the First World War, we know that all of those people were adamantly opposed to the creation of a Jewish state. Now, I totally understand and sympathize with your view that if the Jews owned all the land from 3,000 years ago, I understand that argument, right? But it's also important to realize that when Zionism was getting going, Theodor Herzl, nobody was making that argument. Theodor Herzl never said, oh, just because there might have been Jews there 3,000 years ago, we should just have the whole country. I mean, nobody was ever making that claim back in the day, right?
Well, they overlooked a good argument in their favor.
Oh, okay.
And I disagree with you I agree with you partially.
Partially, right.
When you say the best way to overcome anti-Semitism is through reason and logic and evidence, I agree with you that that's true. Right. But that doesn't mean that Zionism isn't also a way. In other words, just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong. I agree with you that the best way, not the only way, but the best way to get out of anti-Semitism, reason, logic, empirical evidence, fine. But that doesn't mean that the Zionist idea of setting up a state of Israel isn't also a way of getting rid of anti-Semitism. And also, I'm a libertarian. First, I'm a libertarian. Second, I'm a Zionist. And I have these glasses. They're libertarian glasses, and I look through them and I see who is the rightful owner. And I see the Jews. Now, you were saying that during the Balfour Declaration, most people were opposed, but they were trespassers. They shouldn't have been there. They were taking over land that they didn't really belong to, even though they were there 300 or 400 years ago. They should not have had any vote or any such thing like that. Look, I don't see why the Jews can't also have a country. As I said, the Italians, the Japanese, the Brazilians, everybody's got one. And some groups have got more than one. The Catholics have got many. The Protestants have got many. Yeah. The Buddhists have got many countries. The Jews can't have one. Now, on this anti-Semitism, it's not so easy to get rid of it because the fact of the matter is, and this is a very unpopular thing for me to say, the Jewish IQ, the Ashkenazi IQ, is way higher than anyone else. The Jews are, less than 2%. 0.2% of the population of the whole world, and Nobel Prizes in physics and chemistry and economics and Fields Medal in math and the chess grand masterships. We got something like 30% of all these medals, and we less than 0.2%. So people resent that. People resent other people who are smarter than them. And one way to do that is to get a lobotomy on Jews, and we'll be less smart, and then we'll be accepted. I don't really accept that idea. Another way is to realize that people resent other people who are better than them in something, and we Jews are better than a lot of people in intelligence and in math and physics and chemistry, economics, grandmasters and chess, all that. So it's sort of like the rock of Sisyphus. You push the rock up with anti-Semitism and it keeps falling down. I think it's a very good idea that we Jews have a bolt hold, and in case it gets rough in Argentina, they were killing people in some synagogue, and it occurs all throughout Europe. By the way, Europe had a lot of immigrants from the Middle East, and now there are no-go zones for the police, and those no-go zones, Jews can't go there. So it's not going to be so comfortable for Jews in Sweden or Norway or France or any of these other countries. Thank God says the atheist, that we have Israel, that at least they could go somewhere if things become very uncomfortable. But getting rid of anti-Semitism isn't the be-all and the end-all. To me, the be-all and the end-all is justice. The Jews own that property. I'm a big John Lockean fan, and all these other libertarians supposedly adhere to John Locke, and yet somehow when it comes to this, that they're out to lunch.
No, I mean, I agree that for some people, there must be, among millions of individuals, there must be some individuals whose anti Semitism or dislike of Jews may be based on some jealousy. And I totally agree. On a per capita basis, the Jews are extremely successful and so on. But I will say that to me, that is a more recent relative phenomenon due to just the way Jewish culture has evolved during the last couple hundred years. Even Mises himself mentions in his book Socialism how the Jews and the Muslims were not really all that intellectually productive, in the 1800s and so on. The Jews, traditional Jews, before a lot of Jews became atheists. I mean, this whole idea about a lot of Jews becoming secular, right? This is something that is a relatively new phenomenon. In the 1700s, I'm sure most Jews just stuck to the little shtetls and they looked at their Old Testaments and they looked at the religious things, and they were not really the Christians in the 17 and 1800s that started having the intellectual revolution. We had Newton. It was really the Christian world where a lot of Jews suddenly wanted to integrate. And I remember Ludwig von Mises and his family members, a lot of them wanted to assimilate into the larger Christian world, where you started to get more secularism, more focus on the science, and less attention to the old stuff. And I think once the Jews became more secular and they became more interested in the science and they started intermingling more with the rest of the world, that's when we suddenly started to have this massive skyrocketing of very successful science-oriented Jews. So I think this whole thing about the Jews suddenly being very overly represented in intellectual things, I'm guessing that is a more of a relative recent phenomenon.
I disagree.
Okay, great.
My source, by the way, I promised you an hour. We're just about an hour, so we're going to have to stop soon. Charles Murray has written extensively on this, and what he says is exactly what you said, that the Jewish productivity is only a matter of the last few decades, or maybe last century or two. Before that, the Jews were undistinguished. And his explanation is they weren't allowed to be in the colleges. They weren't allowed to be a mathematician or a professor or anything like that. That's his explanation. And I think he was right. And I think that the Jews were smart all throughout history. It's just that they were squelched. And then when they stopped being squelched, they blossomed.
Right. Okay, well, so if we only have you do we have you for 10 more minutes so we can actually talk a little bit about, or do we do this some other time?
Well, we've got 2 more minutes, but I greatly enjoy being on your show, and I'd be happy to be on it again.
Okay.
And the other issues probably would take up a whole hour anyway. I don't want to cram everything into 2 minutes, but I'd be happy to be on your show again. I enjoy talking to you, and I think you're a great host, and Kelly as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's why rush and cram everything into 1 minute?
True.
Let's do it in a month or 2.
Great. This was excellent. We got a nice little background of how we're seeing things, and it's a great foundation, to build on. So thanks a lot, Professor Block. And I do agree that it's very important. I really welcome your ability to debate, and I hope that the guys at the Mises Institute also discuss things with you. We need discussion.
They have nothing to do with me. I've been excommunicated.
Okay.
Well, Walter, I certainly appreciate also you coming on the show. Although I may disagree with you on a lot of your points, I think it's I learned a lot just by hearing from you. Perspectives that I wasn't as familiar with. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that ever. And Jorge and I certainly both appreciate you coming on, and we look forward to our next episode, as you said, in a month or so. But we'll probably wrap things up there. I'll say Walter Block, Jorge Besada, guys, thank you very much for coming on the show. To everyone who tuned in, of course, we'll have another episode of the Kelly Patrick Show out soon. Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Thanks again.